Good afternoon, everyone. We'll wait like for a few minutes so people can join. Okay, so for the sake of time, I think we'll start. So welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on psychological support for migrant workers. We're really happy to have participants from across the region with us today. It's great to see such strong interest in this topic. Before we get started, I'd just like to mention a few quick housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded and it will be shared and uploaded on Aresia's website. Also, some handouts and resources will be shared at the end of the session. Also, we will be sharing everything at the end of the training. There will be like an email after the training to share all the resources and as well as a survey. Um, Please feel free to rename yourself to show your name and your organization's name so everyone is aware. Um, um, and just to add that we'll have like time for question and answers at the end. So please feel free to type your questions in the chat box as we go. And if you're facing any technical issues, please reach out to me or Nadia from Aresia so we can help you navigate this. So we're glad to have James Whitehead with us today. James is from Complete Safety Training Organization and has over 25 years of experience and has trained thousands of professionals in the healthcare, education, security, social services, and corporate sectors, providing practical, hands-on learning experiences and knowledge on mental health first aid. Welcome, James. We're glad to have you here. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. I like to say it's an honor to be able to talk to you. I always find these times beneficial for me. So I'm glad I'm here. And I hope that they're going to be beneficial to you as well. My goal here today is to try and spark some discussion and to talk through some of the issues or the difficulties and challenges that everybody faces in the frontline work that you're doing. And I'd also like to start off just by saying thank you. Thank you for the work that you do. I know the work that you do is probably something you maybe not hear thank you very often. And it can often feel like when you're working in a frontline role where your whole job is to help and support somebody else, especially somebody who is going through difficulty and crisis. It can often feel like your role and the work that you're doing is invisible to the larger community. And so I'd like to say, just as a member of that community, thank you for the work that you're doing. I think the work that you do is it has far-reaching consequences, positive consequences for the larger community, and it's things that you don't see. There's a ripple effect. When we are working with and supporting other people in our community, there is always a positive ripple effect into the larger community. And so I just want to start off by saying thank you for the work that you do. Yeah, at least there's one person who's recognizing it and saying thank you. So yeah, we have quite a bit of of information and content that we want to get through today. And we're gonna, I'd like to also at the same time make sure that we've got some room to breathe and talk through some of the stuff, some of these topics. I'd like to hear from you as we're going through some of this information. And Yeah, we have quite a bit. Does everybody get a chance to look at the agenda of what we're going to be going through today? So if you haven't had a chance to look through the agenda, we're going to be talking about some of the mental health challenges that migrant workers face. So things like systemic challenges that they might be coming up against, cultural challenges, and personal challenges that they're experiencing just by being a migrant worker in Canada. And so we're going to be talking through what some of those are, try to lay the groundwork a little bit for some of the mental health challenges that people are experiencing. We're going to be talking about how do we recognize signs of psychological distress. What does psychological distress look like? Because I don't know about you, but when I'm stressed out and it's something psychological, it's very different than other people who I often encounter. And the reality is, people are complex. People are very complex. Like we see things differently, we experience things differently, we feel things differently. We've had different backgrounds, we've had different upbringing, different experiences, and all of those things are playing on all these the multiple levels of emotional and physical and psychological aspects that make up a person. And so people are, and when I say complex, I don't necessarily mean complicated, although sometimes that can be the case as well. But usually there's just a lot more to people than often we give ourselves credit for. And sometimes there's a lot more to people than we give them credit for. Often, especially in the role that you're working in, I would imagine you're often encountering people often on their worst day. It's day on the times when they're not maybe operating at their best. And so and maybe sometimes people are encountering us on our worst. If I think about people encountering me on my worst day, I do not want them to walk away thinking, oh, that's who James is, because it's not. It's a moment in time, or it's an experience that I'm going through. And so people are complex, and recognizing the signs of psychological distress in people can look different. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk a little bit about culturally sensitive mental health first aid principles. When you're working with people who are from other countries, other cultures, and often with dealing with different languages, there's a lot of sensitivity or recognition that they're not thinking or experiencing things through the same lenses that we are thinking and experiencing things through. And we're going to talk about how and when to refer to appropriate supports. And then hopefully we can talk a little bit about strengthening collaboration and referral networks, and how do we connect with each other. I think that when it comes to supporting any group of people, it always takes more than one specific group in order to support a group of people, because again, people are complex and they have complex needs, and there's often lots of different ways that we can support people, and we bring other people in, it's going to help us out a lot. So do we have any questions or anything before we get started? Okay, I'll take that as a no. All right, no problem. So before we jump into anything else, I'd like to, oh, we got some stuff in the chat there. Let me just check on that real quick. Okay, perfect. There's the agenda there. So what I'm thinking is we're going to start off by talking about some of the different mental health challenges that migrant workers face. And in the agenda, if you've taken a look at it, we talk about systematic barriers, isolation, racism, abuse, and the emotional toll. And so what I'd like to pose as a question before we even jump into talking about these things, some of the mental health challenges that you see people in your line of work facing? What are some of the main mental health challenges that you see in your line of work? Maybe even on a daily basis. What if, and you can put a couple in if you want, but if we can maybe just toss it into the chat, and what is it that you see as mental health challenges faced by migrant workers? Awesome. Uncertainty about their future in Canada. Yeah, definitely. Abuse at work. Yeah, if there's one thing that I know we're not supposed to get angry, but there are some things we should be getting angry about. That is one thing that I think we should be angry about, is abuse at work. I think, yeah, fear about reporting issues, uncertainty about home countries. Yeah, what's happening back at home? Anxiety for not knowing the culture or the system. Separation, and okay, now they're coming in thick and fast. People feeling stuck in their situation. Separation anxiety, depression, racism, alcoholism, hopelessness, abuse, experience with IPV, willingness to report to, is that willingness or unwillingness to report to regulatory? Yeah, unwillingness, I think that's supposed to be. Yeah, for fear of losing their employment, breaks in MSI coverage. Yeah, excellent. Um, yeah, like I said, I think that there are some things that we should be getting angry about. And when I say the things we should be getting angry about, um, it's not so that we can fly off the handle and be frustrated and go and beat somebody up, but sometimes that anger towards injustice, it gives us more courage and purpose and the ability to face something down that maybe feels like it's too big for us. And so we can actually take that and direct that into positive action. It's not anger that has to turn into destructive action. We talk about this in our, we do an anger management course. And we talk a lot about the different types of anger that people can experience. And um, there is anger when it gets out of control and it starts controlling us. Obviously, that's not a good thing. That becomes like a wildfire and it just causes chaos and destruction. But anger in and of itself is not wrong or bad. Anger in itself is amoral. It's just an expression. It's an emotion that we feel. And the question is, what do we do with that emotion? How do we take that emotion and channel it into something positive? And when it comes to things like injustices, that anger at the injustice that either we or somebody else has experienced can often push us to address something or stand up and say something when other people may be afraid to. Uh, and other comment one is the fear reporting and that they don't trust the government, meaning that the government is not on their side. They feel like they're alone in the Canadian dream. That is beautifully said, and it is tragically true. So let's talk a little bit about some of the systemic barriers that people are experiencing, and this is one of the things where the point of this First of all, before we jump into any more of this, I want to say that often when we are talking about things like systemic barriers, things like racism, and all of the things that people have been putting into the chat, it can often make us feel hopeless. Am I the only one who feels that, or is there any hands up around that one? Is that something where it's kind of like, this feels like it is way too big for me? Um, and that's a reality, that when we are going in to help and work with other people, that is something that we have to battle against ourselves. And that's often something that doesn't get addressed, is the fact that we're there to help them, but we're looking at the situation and going, oh, you're absolutely right. I'm feeling depressed just talking to you about this. One of the, I think, most powerful things in the world um, is hope. And I want to just start off talking a little bit about hope. And I usually end talking about hope, and we probably will as well. But before we go in to talking about the mental health challenges that people are experiencing, there's a lot of darkness that is involved in that. There's a lot of difficulty and struggle that people go through. It is very important for us as people who are supporting others um, to look for opportunities to inject hope into the conversation. Yeah, hope is our only way to get strength and resilience. Exactly. There is always hope. Even when things look hopeless, there is always hope. Hope is, well, I wonder if somebody can give me a definition of hope. What do you see hope as? What is hope? And if people want to unmute and give a verbal response, that's wonderful as well. Belief for the better. Yeah.
Possibility of change.
Possibility change. Yes. What else? While there's life, there's hope. Yeah. Being optimistic and believing there's something positive to happen. Yes. So here's my question to you then, because I think that this is going to help provide some a foundation for what we're going to be moving into. Is a feeling that even under fatality, we still have faith in miracles. Yeah. So my question to you is, when you are faced with the overwhelming sense of like, this is the stuff that people are dealing with, the experiences people have, what is it, how do we have hope in the face of the hugeness of what we're facing? How do we have hope in that? Faith and a strong will. Sense of belonging, community, and connection. Yeah. Inspiration from others. Ensuring people know they aren't alone and that they have advocates. Yes, 100%. I'd like to offer something if I could. And this is all wonderful, and this is all I'm not, that doesn't mean any of this is wrong. It's another perspective on it. And I think one of the things is, and this is another thing that anytime that we're talking about mental health challenges, we're talking about some of the struggles people are going through, one of the things that tends to happen is we forget how valuable we are. And often that is the beginning of a loss of hope, is forgetting or not recognizing how valuable we are as human beings. The reality is that no matter what somebody is facing, they are valuable as a person. Just as a person, it has nothing necessarily, the value that I'm talking about has nothing necessarily to do with what they can offer to the world. Often that's the way that we measure someone's value. But the value that a person holds is actually beyond what they can offer to the world. It's the value that they have just exist. I heard somebody explain it this way, and I use it all the time. Often when we are experiencing abuse, when we are experiencing difficulty and hardship and feeling like we're completely alone, we start thinking to ourselves, nobody cares, I must not be valuable. And that may not be, exactly the wording, but that's what we start to believe. And when we start to believe that about ourselves, then we start to project that out into the world. And so the analogy or the example that this guy was talking to a group of high school students, and what he did was he held up $100 bill, and he said, "Who wants this $100 bill?" And they're a bunch of high school students, so you can imagine every single one of them put up their hand. They're like, "Yes, I want the $100 bill." I mean, if I actually had a $100 bill and I put it up and said, "Who wants it?" I'm sure everybody here would be like, "Yeah, you're gonna give out $100. I'm gonna take $100." And this is like a perfect, crisp, new $100 bill, just rolled out of off the mint. And he said, "Okay, I'm going to give it to somebody." And he took it and he crumpled it up and he threw it on the ground and he stomped on it. And then he said, "That is a stupid $100 bill. I hate it." And he said, "Now who wants it?" And you know what? Everybody still went, "Yes, I want it." And he said, "You are just like that $100 bill. There are times where people are going to crumple you up. There are times people are going to throw you to the ground. There are times people are going to stomp on you and tell you that you're worthless and tell you that you're stupid and tell you that they hate you. But that doesn't actually take away any of your value as a person. It just means they are not recognizing the value that you have. And not everybody is going to recognize that value. And that is I think one of the things that we need to hear ourselves, and one of the messages we need to be bringing into these conversations. Because when people recognize, or when somebody is at least one person is telling them, "No, you know what? You are valuable as a person. Doesn't matter what you're offering to the world. You are valuable." And from that, we start producing more value to the rest of the world. It doesn't go the other way. It's not, I have to prove my value. It's something intrinsic that you have just because you exist. And when I think about hope, I think often that is a good place to start, or it is at least a piece of that puzzle, that you have value even when other people are not recognizing it, even when other people are not treating you as if you have any value. It hasn't taken any of that away. And having that as a strong belief, something that we can hold on to, is one of those things that can help us hold on to hope that we can get through whatever it is that we're experiencing. Are there any thoughts or comments or anything anybody wants to add to that?
I would like to add the fact that sometimes we give so many things for granted, and we think negative. Just by the fact of today that we wake up when there's thousands that didn't wake up. The fact that we can see, we can hear, we can eat, when there's thousands that have tubes in the hospital for being fed, that we can walk, and we just give it for granted, right? Like we have water, we have a house, we have a job.
Yeah.
And when you start counting all the blessings that you have, instead of focusing on what you don't have, then it's like you changed the chip right away. Because you start feeling appreciation. You start feeling like you start looking like the positive side of the story, instead of just refocusing all the time on the negative, that I don't have this, I'm lacking this. Yes, you're lacking this right now, but it doesn't mean that you're going to lack it for the rest of your life. It's just temporary. Now you're going to focus that, okay, I don't have my family with me right now as a migrant worker, but I'm working towards bringing them here, or to feed them, or I'm doing my best to provide for them, like. So then it's mostly that changing the chip. That's what I call.
It's flipping that negative narrative, focusing on what I don't have versus focusing on what I do have. And I love that. That's beautiful. I love that, because, and it's actually really important. We call that gratitude, right? It's recognizing what do I have and being thankful for what I have. And when we do that, there's actually been studies on this, and it is one of the interesting things about gratitude is that you actually can't have it. Your brain can't physically carry gratitude and anxiety in the same place at the same time. The brain won't, like, the brain doesn't carry those two side by side. It can either feel gratitude or it can feel anxiety. And that doesn't mean that we may not have some worries and some concerns at the same time, but you can't be grateful for something and be feeling like you don't have anything at the same time. And so that's a really powerful tool. In fact, there was another study that was done in Nova Scotia, and we talk about this in our mental health first aid course. There was a study done in Nova Scotia on young people between the ages of 15 and 25. And what they found, those who were struggling with mental health issues, the number one issue that they were facing was a feeling of hopelessness. And it's that feeling of not having any control, looking into the future and going, I don't think I can do it. And what they found as the best way to combat that was gratitude. So that's beautiful. Anybody else want to add to that? I believe there's a lot of wisdom in this room. So I don't pretend that I know everything, but I do think that there's a lot of wisdom here. And so we'd love to hear from some of you on this as well. Okay, no problem. All right, I want to talk about, let me bring this up over here. I want to talk a little bit about some of the systemic barriers that people are experiencing. What kinds of, before we jump into it, what kinds of systemic barriers are you seeing with the people that you are supporting? What are some of the systemic? And when we say systemic, we're usually talking about institutions or organizations or laws or things that are in place that are acting as a barrier to somebody moving forward. And you can either do a verbal answer or drop something in the chat.
Hi there. One of the things I'm noticing is that folks who are in the middle of an application or have applied to extend their work permits or have applied for PR, there's a lack of, I guess, access to information and like being able to speak to someone to get help, directly about your application, what you need to do. And there's a lot of nuances to these applications. Like I've helped various families, with the process. It's extremely complex. And if you don't have, a lawyer, an immigration lawyer that you need to have the resources for to pay for, and then in many cases, immigration lawyers charge an astronomical amount of money, and people put so much money into it, and because it is so complicated. But there's like very rare opportunities to really speak to someone, and there is a number you can call that I only recently learned about. But I think that like lack of access to that information that really is, it's about your future and what's going to happen to you in 6 months from now, and not knowing, with young children, who want to go to school and they really just don't know what to do. So it's like just this period of time where it's like, I don't know what to do. So I think that's one of the barriers I'm seeing. And probably because there are so many folks in this situation right now, there's such a backlog that it's probably worse than it has been in the past.
Christian, I see your hand. I'm going to get to you in just a second. Yeah, Hillary, that's definitely that can become really frustrating, and it can feel like the institution or the government is against you. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is that way. It does seem to be that way. I think that's how people feel.
Yeah. And would you say that people who are experiencing that, because it's one of those things where being act information for whatever reason, if the information isn't available, how then do you deal with that? Right?
Yeah, and it's hard. I mean, even for someone who was born in Canada and has access to resources, it's hard for me to find the information, right? So who to go to. So I can imagine how much harder it is for folks who aren't used to navigating the system. To do so.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Hillary. Christian, go ahead.
Yeah, there is also technical difficulties. Like, for example, if you would like to file a case for an open work permit for vulnerable workers, you can only do it on a laptop. So which temporary foreign workers bring a laptop into Canada, right? The other thing that you need to have Adobe Acrobat, otherwise you will not be able to fill it. So the first time I did it, it took me 3 weeks just to understand how it works. Now I can do it really easy. But imagine being somebody that is in a foreign country that works maybe 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. in peak season because they work more than 12 hours, try to arrive home and then try to navigate this system that is designed for failure. Because if the government would like to help the workers, they will give it an easy system to navigate through, right? Or the application could be submitted by a phone. Everybody has a phone with a smartphone, and not necessarily a laptop, right? And also the barriers. The website says that Service Canada tip line actually has interpreters, but the open work application, it's only in English and French, and 90% of them do not speak either English or French. So those are these technical barriers that can be avoided from the government side, but looks like there is no willing to do that.
Right. Enrique.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, basically just like Christian, in my case, I work with refugee claimants, and kind of the same barriers we're seeing from them. So it's very difficult, for example, the self-representation before the hearing, submitting evidence and documents to support their cases. So because they're not tech savvy, there's so many people that they're not tech savvy. And many forms they require the to be in PDF, Adobe PDF, and many of them they don't have the license because they don't bring a laptop, they don't bring this kind of licenses with them, right?
Yeah.
So they
Yeah.
have to rely on us. So
Yeah.
these kind of desperations basically just accelerate the anxiety levels, they accelerate their feeling of frustration, and sometimes accelerate the process for be diagnosed on depression. And the same happen if doesn't matter if they are working or not, or they're still on an income support or something like that. But
Yeah.
the thing is like when they're not able to restore their source of income, like working properly, or they're underemployed or something like that. It's very, very frustrating even for us as service providers, because where we can get those tools, and when you can see some other kind of policies that are around, on the system itself, instead of helping, is basically getting us backwards instead of or providing some solutions, right?
Right.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So is there anybody else who wants to jump in? Nuria.
I think we should pretty much go all the way to the bottom. And some of these workers that they come, they don't even know how to write or to read properly their own language. Not saying English, their own language.
Yeah.
So when we do sometimes like applications for open work permit, Christian can get more information about that. We end up having to assist them to make their narratives, because they are incapable of doing their own narratives because they don't know how to write. Because these employers are bringing people that didn't even finish high school.
Right.
So they, especially on programs like agricultural, sometimes in the fisheries, like if you've seen the requirements for the TFW program, these people they don't have education, period.
Yeah.
So we are, for them not having education in their own language, and then coming to a country that they have a different language, a different system, and that they don't have the tools, as the other people said. Obviously, they can't afford an iPad, they can't afford a laptop, they can't afford anything, because they come from very small communities that some of these people doesn't even have a toilet in 2025.
Yeah.
So or they shower with buckets because they don't have showers.
Yeah.
So it's like kind of like pushing them to the extreme, right? Trying to ask them to go to the hospital yourself and talk, communicate, or make yourself a report of abuse. Like obviously these people feels hopeless and they feel like they don't know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, Suzanne says systemic racism, language barriers, not being able to speak the language, and maybe not even like what Nuria was saying, not being able to read or write very well your own language, and afraid of being scammed. Yeah. Because they're feeling vulnerable. And one of the things that you will find when people start to feel vulnerable is they get defensive. Does anybody notice that? People get defensive very, very quickly. And it's because when it comes to defensiveness is it's a defense mechanism that we sort of automatically go into when we feel like we have done something wrong. That's what defensiveness is, when we feel like we've done something wrong, or when we think somebody else thinks we've done something wrong. Being defensive has everything to do with social status. That's what being defensive is all about. And it's because the most important thing to anybody, regardless of where they come from, regardless of what language they speak, what culture they're from, everybody's one of the most important things to any human is, what is my status in the group that I'm a part of right now? So if you're in a group of people, if you go into a group of people and it's a group of people that you don't know, you go into that group with zero status until you can establish where you sit in that group. And that is a lot of what people coming into the country are experiencing. They're coming in, it's like going into and hanging out with a bunch of people that they don't know, and they're having to figure out, where do they sit? And so one of the things that tends to happen is, we tend to, or anybody who's in that situation is going to be looking for what other people are saying. How are they treating me? How are they talking to me? How are they including me? Are they inviting me to things because I'm the new one? Right? And they're looking for that. And when we feel like that isn't happening, we start to get defensive, because what we're trying to do is protect what social status we actually have. And understanding that is actually one of the keys to helping people who are in those types of situations. They're not just being jerks. And I don't think anybody here thinks this, but not just being jerks for the sake of being jerks. They're trying to protect what dignity they feel they have. They're trying to protect their value as a person. And so they're going to find all kinds of different ways to do that. Unfortunately, what ends up happening in those types of situations is, because one of the other aspects of defensiveness is, it's part of our fight or flight system. So our fight or flight system will it kicks in when we feel like we're being threatened. If we think that some part of our identity or some part of us physically is being threatened, our brain automatically goes into fight or flight. And so what happens is it starts a whole bunch of adrenaline going through our body, and it makes it really difficult for our brains to actually process logical information. And so when people are in that heightened state over long periods of time, which is often the individuals that you're working with, they're in a constant state of fight or flight. It makes it even more difficult for them to physically process, especially logical or complicated or difficult information. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how we can sort of help people through that. But I want to talk a little bit about some of these other mental health issues, because in case you haven't noticed, I have a tendency to go down rabbit holes. So I'm going to try and stick to my notes. Some other common mental health concerns that we might see among migrant workers, and if some of these are ones that you're seeing or that you've seen people experience or maybe experienced yourself, feel free to put a thumbs up in the chat, or feel free to put a comment in the chat. But things like anxiety disorders, constantly worrying about immigration status. We've had people talking about that one already. Where am I? It's that sense of, do I belong here? And is there any security for me? Losing their job, worrying about family back home. And this can often turn into things like panic attacks, Has anybody had to deal with people struggling through panic attacks? Is that something people have had to deal with? Where somebody they feel like their heart is racing, their chest is all tight, they may feel dizzying, hands are shaking, feels like they're throwing up, they feel like they want to throw up. All of that is part of that fight or flight system. And we don't have time to go into the entirety of how all of that works, but essentially, that when that fight or flight system is engaged, one of the first things that happens, and I'm going to give you this as a helpful tool for dealing with panic attacks in the moment. One of the things that tends to happen is we start breathing faster. So we start breathing faster because our brain is thinking, or our nervous system is thinking, I'm in danger, I'm under threat. When somebody's having a panic attack, is there an actual immediate threat in the moment? No. There isn't an immediate physical threat to their safety. Now, they may feel that there is a threat to their safety long term, but their immediate, when somebody's having a panic attack, their body is essentially saying, we need to either fight or run, and it's getting the body ready to fight or to run. And so what tends to happen is we start breathing faster. Now, if I'm running, I'm going to be breathing faster because my muscles need all that extra oxygen. But if I'm not actually running, then what happens is, as I'm breathing in more oxygen, that oxygen isn't actually getting used. So now I have too much oxygen in my system, not enough carbon dioxide. And so there's a physical thing that's happening. It's not just psychological. There's a physical thing that's happening, and we can deal with it from a physical perspective. And there's two main ways that we can actually help. And I'll give you two really quick tips on how to help somebody in a panic attack, at least to help bring them down so you can have a conversation with them. First thing is get them to focus on you or something other than what they're focusing on. People in a panic attack are going to be focusing on one thing, and their brain actually can't get off of that because that's what they feel is a threat, and that's what they're focusing on. So we want to try and redirect their focus. We can direct it onto ourselves, or we can use physical stimulation. So doing things like getting them to take their thumb and put it into the palm of their hand and push. That's one physical way we can do that. Another way is if you take your fingers and you put it right here in the center of your chest, take a deep breath, and then let it out and push in here at the same time. You'll actually feel some of that tension start to release. And what we're doing is we're actually activating the vagus nerve, which is sort of the brake in our system. It's a brake that's built in specifically for dealing with fight or flight. So either we're putting gas on fight or flight, or we're putting the brake on. And so we want to activate that vagus nerve. So by pushing, doing some physical stimulation, pushing in the center of the chest, pushing in the middle of the palms of the hands, getting them to focus on something other than what they're focused on. And the other thing is get them to take a deep breath and hold it. This is one of the most effective ways of dealing with a panic attack. Take a deep breath, hold it for 10 seconds, then let it out slowly. If you can get them to that place, then physically that vagus nerve starts to take over, and it will start to put the brake on all that extra adrenaline that they're experiencing. And you can start getting them to a place where you can actually have a conversation. So panic attacks are a big thing. Another one is depression, persistent sadness, loss of motivation, hopelessness. And often what comes along with this is things like fatigue, sleep issues, a disconnection from other people. And often as a part of this, people can start having suicidal thoughts. And often those are things that they aren't going to want to discuss. They're not going to want to talk about that, or it's not something that they're just going to come out and tell you. It's something that they are feeling and experiencing, but they're not just going to come out and say, oh, by the way, I'm feeling like I want to kill myself. Because there's often a lot of shame and fear that's associated with it. Other things that people might be dealing with are things like post-traumatic stress disorder. This is probably something that some of your clients or the people that you're working with are struggling through. And post-traumatic stress disorder is it's trauma that is specifically related to things like past violence, and often things like exploitation or even immigration journeys. So going from their country into Canada or into another country, that process of going from their country to another area, to another place, another country, just that immigration process can be very traumatic because there's all kinds of things that can happen along the journey. And so often what they will experience, and this is not everybody who's gone through those experiences struggles with PTSD. But when people are struggling with PTSD, what you are going to see are things like flashbacks, or what they are going to experience are flashbacks back to the moment of violence or exploitation or whatever the trauma was. And these flashbacks are vivid. It's not just remembering that it happened. These are flashbacks where they feel like they are there, and they feel like they are experiencing it over and over and over again. Nightmares, hypervigilance, constantly on alert, and shutting down emotionally. People will shut down emotionally in order to protect themselves emotionally. Other things that we will see are difficulty coping with sudden changes in environment or culture. I'm a Canadian. I moved from one part of Canada to another part of Canada, and I experienced culture shock. I know it's not on the same level, but just moving from one region to another, you're going to experience culture shock, right? Because everything is different. Nothing is recognizable. People have different expectations. People have different language. They even in the language that you usually speak, you're going to see people talk differently. So take that and times it by 1,000, and that's what people are experiencing. And there's being overwhelmed by new expectations, routines, and the loss of familiar support systems. Just transferring from one type of support system to another, and we've heard some of this already when we're talking about even technical issues, and we're talking about how the government words things and what the government is expecting, or what your employer is expecting. They're often going to be very different. Often as a coping mechanism, we're seeing people dealing with substance use. And when we talk about substance use, often there's a fear of punishment or deportation that goes along with this. I just want to say this about substance use or addiction issues. Addiction is not the problem. Addiction is their solution to a different problem. So when we are talking to somebody who is struggling with addiction, we are talking to somebody who has a problem other than the addiction. And so the only way for that person to overcome the addiction is for that other problem to be dealt with. We have to start there. We don't start necessarily at the addiction level. Sometimes people will have physical symptoms from emotional distress, headaches, stomach issues, body pain with no medical explanation. Does anybody have anybody that's experiencing this? It's like they're experiencing some sort of stomach pain or bodily pain that doesn't seem to have any they go, even if they go and see a doctor, the doctor's like, no, you're perfectly healthy. There's nothing wrong with you. Well, we've run blood work, we've run tests, we've checked everything out. No, you're fine. That in and of itself can be very frustrating, but it's actually because of emotional stress. So being under constant stress actually has physical impact on our physical health. And sometimes just somebody understanding that, it helps to alleviate a lot more emotional stress that goes along with that. Because otherwise what can tend to happen is people get into the mindset of, and this is part of that negative mindset that we were talking about, is well, they don't want to help me, right? They can't find anything wrong with me because they don't want to help. They're not actually looking hard enough. And there's a lot of fear that goes along with that. And it just makes things worse. Yeah, Enrique says addictions always have another root cause, and this is so deep inside the people who are suffering the addiction. Yeah, it's a side effect of the real problem. That's right. The addiction is always a way, is in pretty much every single case, it's a way of trying to deal with or medicate ourselves from some other emotional situation that we're dealing with that we don't see a solution to. And it's a way of coping with all of that extra emotion that we're struggling with. Other things that we see: fear, paranoia, hypervigilance, people not feeling safe even when they're in a safe place. And it's because our brains kind of start to get rewired by past traumas that we've experienced, especially when there's been physical violence involved. Then it actually rewires how our brains work. Now, we were talking earlier about hope. And when we talk about brains getting rewired, I always like to inject a piece of hope onto that discussion. And the hope I wanted to inject into that conversation is that brains our brains are very elastic. So whatever we are experiencing, whatever brain disorder or emotional disorder that we're struggling with, we're creating new neural pathways. That means that we can create more new neural pathways. Often what happens is we get stuck in a certain mindset because it's a negative one, and we feel like, well, this is who I am now. Well, if you got there, you can get out. And it's not necessarily just force of will. We need support. We need all these other things involved in it. But the hope is that if our brains can get rewired one way, they can get rewired another way. So we're not stuck where we're at. And then loneliness and homesickness, missing family, culture, language, food, spiritual support, feeling invisible or like you don't belong anywhere. Are there any ones in there that I have missed or that people want to look at a little more closely? Okay. Then what I'd like to do is let's move on to the next section, and that's recognizing psychological distress. And this is just a matter of being able to identify behavioral, emotional, physical, and verbal indicators of stress. So there's four categories that we want to look at here. And the first one is, so there's behavioral signs, there's emotional signs, there's physical signs, and there are verbal signs that somebody is struggling with psychological distress. So some behavioral signs, some things to be watching out for, things like withdrawing from group activities, especially when they're withdrawing from group activities that they would normally be engaging in. So that could be things like faith services, that could be family gatherings, it could be even meetings with yourself. Sudden drop in work performance. So all of a sudden, their work performance is just starting to suffer. You're not showing up to work as much, or they're not doing as well at their job. Avoidance or defensiveness. We've talked a little bit about defensiveness already. What are some of the ways that you can tell when somebody is being defensive? What are some of the signs that you've noticed or that you've recognized where somebody is being defensive?
But
ignoring something or someone.
Yeah. Go ahead, Christian.
yeah, I wanted to ask, how can we see if somebody is being defensive? Actually, whenever you try to speak with them in English, this does not happen to me, but if they cannot express themselves in English, right? It's quite complicated for us to see if that somebody that's not speaking your language actually is being defensive, because whenever we speak in Spanish, people will start talking and talking and talking, but whenever we speak in English, they will just try to communicate the basic idea, right?
Yeah.
And that can be a sign of being defensive, but we cannot actually understand that because they do not speak the English, they cannot express themselves, right?
Yeah. No, that's a good point, Christian. I think somebody actually put in the chat things like body language and attitude. So when somebody who is normally very loud, when they become quiet, or if they're normally quiet, they become really loud. I think one of the biggest ways that we can tell if somebody's getting defensive is they start getting irritable and snapping. Regardless of what language they're speaking in, because you're absolutely right. When somebody is speaking in their their primary language, they are able to communicate verbally very effectively. But actually, probably 38%, I think it's 38% of how we communicate has to do not just with the words that we're using, but how fast we're talking, how what's the pitch and tone of our voice, and whether we are and how loudly we're talking. So those are often, even if we don't understand the language, we can often hear a change in how they're the attitude that's coming across in what they're saying. Does that make sense? The other thing is body language. So a large percentage of how we communicate is body language, and body language is universal. So when somebody, so I'll give you an example. If I'm sitting here and I'm sitting here like this, what am I saying?
That you're not interested in the meeting.
Yeah. One of the things that anytime you see shoulders rolled forward, that's somebody trying to protect themselves. Shoulders rolled forward is hunching against an expectation of some sort of attack. And it doesn't have to mean physical. It can be emotional or psychological, or just feeling like they're under attack in all kinds of different ways. So when you see shoulders rolled forward, you're looking at somebody who feels like they are under attack. Confidence is one of the best ways to tell if somebody is feeling confident is looking at the distance between their earlobe and their shoulder. So if my shoulders are back, right, and my back is straight, and I'm talking to you and I'm able to look you in the eye, or at the very, even if it's not making eye contact, I'm able to keep my chin up. That's a physical sign that I'm feeling confident. As soon as my shoulders start going up, all of a sudden I'm feeling insecure. I'm feeling unsure about something. So when we're especially when we're dealing with languages with that language barrier, often we have to look past the words that they're saying and look at what their body language is actually telling us. Does that make sense? Is that something people have seen? Is that something people are experiencing or seeing?
In my case, it's quite complicated because most of the, actually 100% of my intakes and meetings are online. So I can only see the face and sometimes with an interpreter. So that's why I didn't consider body language, but you're 100% right.
Yeah. So it makes it way more difficult when that's the setup that you have, because you can't see all of that extra body language. That said, facial expressions can tell you quite a bit. So as an example, the more somebody is showing their teeth, usually the more insecure they are. So if somebody's showing their teeth a lot, they may be smiling or they may be angry. Whichever one it is, when somebody's showing their teeth a lot, they're often very insecure. You can also see by their eyebrows, eyebrows up is usually surprise, or yeah, often it's being surprised by something. But if someone's eyebrows are down all of the time, I mean, they could mean a lot of different things, but it's usually they're trying to guard or protect themselves somehow. And they may be trying to protect themselves through anger, or they may be trying to protect themselves through trying to just shield their eyes from you. And it's not a conscious thing. None of these are conscious things. It's not somebody going, oh, I'm going to protect my eyes from you so you can't see me. It's a subconscious thing that we do. And that's what I mean by it's a universal language, because it's not something we do intentionally. Verbal language is something that we do intentionally. And that said, if there's a lot of unintentional things that we say, I don't know if anybody's ever done that. But we can say things unintentionally, but there's still there's usually an intention to verbal language. Is that helpful, Christian? Okay. Yeah, they start shaking or sweating too much and a short temper. Yeah. So Nuria, if you're seeing somebody who is shaking, sweating too much, and they have a short temper, they're going into a defensive mode, but you are dealing with somebody who is in fight or flight. That's what you're dealing with when you see those symptoms. As somebody who is in fight or flight. And if you're in physical proximity to that person, it's a sign for you that you should take a step back and give them space. That's one of the things that we need to do in those situations, is give space. This is not a time to push, because the more we push, the more they are going to feel attacked. Even if our intention is not attack, even if we're saying all the right words and our body posture is good and we're not using an angry tone, we could be using a soothing tone. But the more that we're pushing at something when somebody is in that situation, the more heightened they're going to become. And so that's a sign that we need to back off. And often it's time to just listen. Okay. Emotional signs. tearfulness, sadness, or hopelessness, angry outbursts or unusual irritability, fear, anxiety, or constant worry. And this is a big one, overreacting to minor stressors. Has anybody ever noticed this one? It's like something small happens and there's like an outburst. This is a sign that somebody is already feeling like they're under stress. One of the ways that I think is helpful to think about how people deal with emotions, especially when they are in emotional distress, is our ability to control. Well, let me ask you your emotions.
Sorry, James, can you repeat the questions? Because your voice broke a bit.
Oh, sure. Can you control your emotions?
Yes.
Okay. This is often something that we think we can control our emotions. Hillary said you can control how you respond. Yes. I actually don't have direct control over my emotions. We don't directly control them. We can influence them. We can, though usually the word that we talk about is we can, oh, now the words left me. We can adjust them, but we have to use something else in order to do that. So for an example, if I was to tell you, get angry right now, summon anger right now, how would you do that?
You will just think about a situation that really frustrates you or make you mad.
That's right. I have to think about something else in order for anger to happen. So I'm not just all of a sudden becoming angry. I don't have direct control over anger. Every time we are experiencing an emotion, and this is super important, when we are experiencing an emotion, it is a reaction or a response to something external. It's a reaction or response to something that is happening. It's a very important concept to understand, because if we believe that we can just control our emotions, doesn't mean we can't bring ourselves under control, but we're not directly trying to control emotions. Every time we do that, it won't work and we will get frustrated. The way that we control, or the way that we modulate emotions, is by controlling our behaviors and our thoughts. That's how we control it. So if we're telling people you need to get your emotions under control, we're giving them an impossible task, and we're not being specific enough for what they can actually do to modulate their emotions. Right? So instead, it's, rather than saying you need to control your emotions, it's, what are you believing about this situation right now? How we control our emotions is by looking at, what do I think or believe about myself, about this situation, and about what's happening around me. So that's the question that I need to be asking. And then I control my physical responses, and I can control my thoughts. Right? I can hold on to a thought, or I can let a thought go. I have that ability. So just because a thought comes into my head doesn't mean I have to hold on to it. I can say, you know what? This is not actually true. I'm going to believe something that's true. And that's why I start this whole session off talking about, what do I believe about myself? Do I believe that I am valuable, even if other people aren't showing me that as a truth? Does that make sense? So when it comes to managing our emotions, we start by managing our thinking. And we're gonna take a look at how we can do that in some practical scenarios in a few minutes. But when somebody is overreacting to a minor stressor, what's happening? So when somebody experiences something minor, if we start saying to them things like, oh, well, it's not that big of a deal, it starts to sound to them like we're dismissing something that for them in the moment is very, very important. And the reason that they're overreacting to something minor is that self-control muscle that we have. It's like a muscle. Self-control is like a muscle. It's our ability to control our thoughts and our actions. So if that muscle is strained, more difficult for me to maintain that control. So for example, if you were to take your hand and hold it straight out like this, you hold your hand out in front of you. How long can you hold your hand out in front of you? Probably for quite a while. But all of a sudden, somebody comes along and they say something mean. It's like putting a 5-pound weight on the end of your arm. Now you got to hold that up. Somebody else comes along and they're saying something racist towards you. And now we put another 5-pound weight on there. Or maybe that's a 10-pound weight. Maybe we start thinking about some past experiences that we've had, and that becomes a 25-pound weight. Now, every single time, so these are major situations that are happening, it gets to a point where we're under so much strain from all these other things that we're carrying that all it takes is something really, really small for that muscle of self-control to just let go. And that's what ends up happening. And so that's where you see those major outbursts. The outburst isn't over the minor situation. It's because they're under, and they may not even be able to articulate all of the different reasons why they're feeling like they're under so much strain. But that's where it's happening. I will tell you this. Our job to support somebody who's in that situation, to be an emotional support, our job is not to carry the emotion for them. If we try and carry the emotion for them, you will now have you have two people who are going to be emotionally stressed out. Our job is not to carry the emotion for them. Our job is to support them so that we can give them a bit of relief and a bit of rest while they are learning how to let go of those emotional weights that they're carrying. Some physical signs, we talked about this a little bit already. Unexplained headaches, stomach aches, or fatigue. Sometimes changes in appearance or hygiene. Somebody's now all of a sudden not really looking after themselves very well. Loss of appetite or overeating, one way or the other. And trouble sleeping or excessive sleepiness. Are these things that people have seen? Yeah. Some verbal signs, we'll just finish up with these. Saying things like "I'm fine" when they are clearly not. Nothing matters anymore. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's okay. It doesn't matter. Even when you know that it is something that matters to them very much. I just want to go home. Or sometimes they will start intentionally or unintentionally almost sabotaging themselves. They will start sabotaging they'll be, missing deadlines for putting in forms to the government, or the forms will be filled out wrong, or they don't want to go through all of the hoops that they have to go through in order to get a certain status or to submit information. Maybe they'll say things like, I think I might be done, or they don't want to be a burden. I don't want to be a burden on anybody. That's a key telltale sign. No, I don't want to bother anybody. Right? Those are some verbal signs that people are they're getting to a point where emotionally they're having a really difficult time coping. All right. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Good. Yeah, let's take a 5-minute break and we'll come back and we'll continue talking a little bit more. Does that sound good?
Yes.
All right. Are we finding it helpful so far? A lot of what we've been talking about is kind of outlining the problems. And I feel like everybody's probably very aware of the problems and the issues that people are facing. This section that we're going to jump into this is where we're starting to talk about just some tools that we can use in some of these difficult situations. So has anybody ever heard of ALGEE, ALGEE, as a methodology for dealing with mental health first aid issues? Anybody ever heard? If you've never taken a mental health first aid course, then you probably wouldn't have heard of it. But ALGEE is kind of like a framework that we can use. It's like so we teach mental health first aid. We also teach physical first aid, and what I have found is that people who are working in first aid or any type of first aiders always love acronyms. Medical community loves acronyms, and so ALGEE is an acronym that it can be helpful for just a way of approaching mental health situations that people are struggling with. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through 2 sections. I'm going to go through them, and feel free to jump in if you've got questions or if you've got something that you want to add. But I want to go through ALGEE. We're going to go through the different elements of it, and we're also going to take a look at some do's and don'ts in terms of cultural sensitivity. And again, I'd love to, yes, ALGEE. Thank you, Atul. But it's I'd also like to get your input on the cultural considerations as well. But we're going to just sort of go through that as a framework to start with. And then what I'd like to do is we're going to get into some breakout rooms, and we're going to have about 20 or 30 minutes to talk through some scenarios and to talk through how we would approach some of those different scenarios using ALGEE. Now, just because we go through this, I also want to say this is a framework and it's a tool. It's not the be all end all. It doesn't mean this is how you have to deal with all of your situations or your clients in every single situation. It's just a helpful tool and a reference that we can kind of fall back on. One of the things with tools like this is they're helpful for basically giving us cues for actually, some prompts. It's basically some prompts or things that we want to be looking out for. The skill comes in when we're actually able to apply this on a consistent basis when situations pop up, and we start to integrate it into we start to integrate it into how we communicate with people. No problem, Enrique. Thank you very much. So let's talk about ALGEE. So I'm gonna put I wonder if I can share a piece of my screen here. Share. That's one. All right, can everybody see that? Okay, I'm just going to move this over here. And all right. Now I can't see anybody else. Hold on a second. Okay, chat. Okay, good. So this is just a quick reference guide. We'll talk about this a little bit more. But these are just some supporting steps that we can use. So ALGEE is ALGEE, and the A just stands for approach or assess for risk of harm. Now, when we're talking about this from a mental health first aid situation, we're looking at this from the perspective of dealing with somebody who is struggling with some sort of mental health issue. And it's often, when we're talking about first aid, we're not coming in as a therapist. We're not coming in as the doctor. We're not coming in as the surgeon. We're coming in as we're just trying to understand where somebody is coming from and provide whatever help or support we can. And then we want to then move them on to the appropriate person to help them further on. And so that's sort of the context of where this comes out of. So this, we don't want to start looking at this as oh well, this is how I'm going to fix the problem. This is more a situation where we're looking at how do I assess what's going on, what are the supports I can provide, and how do I then help this person get into whatever supports that they're going to need for more long-term help. So that's the approach that we're taking. So it's the approach and assessing for risk of harm. First thing that we want to know is the person in immediate danger? Right? That's our first level of assessment. Are they in any physical, emotional, or suicidal risk? Is this person in physical danger? Are they in emotional danger where they could spiral into a mental health crisis? Or are they at risk for suicide? And those are very real dangers. And our number one way of starting this whole approach is speaking calmly and non-threateningly. Now, one of the things when we're trying to help somebody else calm down, it's really important that we are remaining calm as well. And so sometimes one of the things that I find for myself, and maybe this is something that you can relate to as well. I'm a fixer. I like to fix people. I like to fix things. And so when a problem arises, I will often try and go immediately to the solution. Oh, this is the problem. Oh, you got a problem? I'll solve it. Here you go. This is all you have to do. This is what you do. And often that can be kind of off-putting for people, especially when they are in a mental health crisis. So this whole idea of an approach or an assessment is we want to know where this person is coming from and what it is that they're dealing with. But our number one concern, are they in immediate danger? And sometimes the approach, we want to come in easy, is asking things like, can I sit with you? Or would you like to talk? Sometimes it's a matter of sitting with the person and not saying anything for a period of time. I think sometimes we underestimate the value of silence, the value of just sitting with somebody. When somebody, have you ever been in a situation and it maybe there's such common one, pretty much everybody has probably experienced at one time or another, is you go to a funeral and nobody ever really knows what to say. And often that's the situation. And maybe you've been in a funeral or a situation like that, and there's somebody there who doesn't know what to say, and they just won't stop saying something. They're saying the wrong thing, and they keep on saying the wrong thing. And it's like constant foot in mouth syndrome, right? And that happens all the time. And the reason that happens is because we don't know what to do. We panic and we start saying something, and it's like, I can't stop myself. Has anybody ever had that experience or seen that happen? This approach and assessing for a risk of harm, sometimes the way that we need to start is by not saying very much at all. It is often the way that we need to start is just by sitting with them and being in that space with them. And we need to give ourselves permission to do that. That's okay. If we don't know what to say, sometimes it's just a matter of saying, can I just sit with you? And just having somebody there, even when there's no words being said, there's no expectation of them saying anything or doing anything. That can sometimes be one of the most profound emotional supports that we can give somebody. When we are talking about people who are, if they are in physical, emotional, or at risk of suicide, then we want to know what kind of risk we're talking about. If this is a phone call, then we want to know, like, are you in danger right now? Can you get out from where you are right now? Our number one concern at that point is making sure that they are safe. And if they are not, either encouraging them to get to a safe place or calling 911. Now, I just want to touch on calling 911 for a second, because this can be something difficult for people who are migrant workers, because they're not necessarily going to trust the police. Is that the case? Do people find that people have a hard time trusting the police? And often they have good reason for that. So, but at the same time, if somebody is in danger, what other options do we have? If somebody is in physical danger, what other options do we have in order to help them in that time of physical danger? And I'm asking that as a real question. Nonviolent crisis intervention. So Nuria, when you're saying that, are you talking about the NVCI response team? Is that what you're talking about? Or are you just talking about doing NVCI in that situation? Right. Yeah. So NVCI are techniques on how to de-escalate a situation. But if you're, is that something where you're thinking you're going to do that, or do you want them to do that? Like, if we're thinking about somebody who's in potentially physical danger and we're trying to help them in that situation.
Well, when you say about the assessment, also it comes the point of if I'm too small and the client is too big, well, you're not even gonna attempt to do that, because you're gonna end up on the floor though with a big punch.
Okay, so you're looking at this from the perspective of the client is becoming violent and now you might be in danger. Yes. Okay. So yeah, then definitely, yeah, if you are the one who is physically in danger, then yes, get yourself out of that situation And if you have, if you have some training, or if you can de-escalate the situation, then definitely we want to be using those skills 100%. But I'm saying that if you are helping one of your clients and your client is the one who is in danger, that's what this assessment is about. It's about, are they in danger? Maybe in their current situation, maybe in the job that they're in, maybe they're in danger for some other reason. But that's that assessment, is, are they at risk, not becoming dangerous, but is there danger to them? Does that make sense? Am I being clear?
Yeah, you're saying like it can potentially be like a danger for somebody else or themselves. Sorry.
Yeah, maybe they're a danger to themselves. Maybe one of the things that we were talking about earlier when we were talking about some of the barriers or difficulties that migrant workers experience is maybe abuse from their employer. And that abuse could be emotional, it could be verbal, but maybe it's physical, right? Are they dealing with emotional abuse, or physical abuse? If somebody's dealing with physical abuse, then they are in physical danger. And so these are like, if we get a panicked phone call, that's the picture I'm having in my head, is I'm getting a panicked phone call from one of my clients, and they're upset and they're angry about a situation that has happened. The first thing I want to know is, are you in physical danger right now? We're not, I mean, if it's something that comes out in a meeting, then that's a question that we want to know. Are they in physical danger? Are they in danger of physically being harmed in the role that they're in, or in the job that they're in, or another situation that they are dealing with, maybe that doesn't have anything to do with work? One of the other things that we see a lot of is domestic violence. Right. So if you've got somebody who's dealing with domestic violence, what do we do? Like, that is an emotional strain and potentially a physical risk that they are dealing with. And so this assessment for a risk of harm is just that. Is this person in danger? And that's the first thing that we want to know. Are they in danger, either from somebody else, or are they a danger to themselves?
Well, I also toss there the fact that I find that one of the best techniques for de-escalating like situations when people is frustrated and whatever is to obviously listen to them, but be empathetic, to put on their own shoes.
Yes.
But from a real perspective, not like, oh yeah, I understand, yeah. No, it's actually listen to them.
Yeah.
And for them to tell you what they are dealing with, and then try to put yourself in their shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And then like kind of like turn the situation like, well, that's more like towards going to counseling, that they are gonna give you their at the end the answer or the solution for their own problem.
Oh yeah.
Because you just toss them like a questions such as like what you would do to fix the problem. And they are giving themselves the answer. It's just they just didn't know, like they were so frustrated that they couldn't see the whole picture. But you are just listening to them, you're summarizing, you're being empathetic at them, and then you're just tossing the questions, right?
Yeah. And then they kind of solve their own problem without you really having to say a whole lot.
Yeah, exactly. They got their own answer that they knew they had. And also like by showing that empathy, like it's absolutely, you can go from here to here.
Yeah, you can bring that you can de-escalate that situation very quickly.
Yep.
Somebody said duty to report comes into play if children have witnessed abuse. Yeah. Right. So when we're dealing with situations of and what you're saying, Nuria, in terms of like, that's classic nonviolent crisis intervention, motivational interviewing techniques that you're talking about. Like those are skills that we can use to help de-escalate a person. And sometimes we can still use those skills in a situation where somebody is anxious and heightened and frustrated or upset because they are in danger from somebody else. But if they are in danger from another person, that's something that I want to explore and find out what's going on. And if there is a situation where physical abuse is happening, then yeah, there is a duty to report it, particularly if children are being abused, which brings in a whole nother layer of complication.
Yeah, it's reporting obviously, but also like come up with a plan, right? Like if somebody's getting abused, like domestic violence, obviously the plan A is to how you're gonna get out of that abuse.
Yeah.
You have to leave the home, you have to leave the partner, you have to go to the police and put a restriction order, like go to A to C and like say, okay, if I have to go out of my home, where am I gonna go? Well, there's shelters. Let's explore about shelters. Where can you go? What is close to your area? Whatever, like.
Yeah. Yeah. Does anybody have any other examples of situations where this is maybe something that you've encountered, where somebody is at physical risk, either to themselves or they're at risk from somebody else physically? Is this something that people see happening?
I don't know if this will qualify as such, but at the Model Center, we're taking some cases of victims of domestic violence now. The main issue is that they cannot leave the household because there are kids involved sometimes. And the main issue is because their status in Canada depend on the abuser.
Right.
Right. So whenever we do that, we try to take the meetings, because everything is online. We try to take the meetings outside of the household, right? Like try to go to Starbucks or try to go to a friend's house, so we know that you are in a safe place.
Yes.
The other thing that I would like to point out is, like, for example, when we work with temporary foreign workers and we know that they're living in a house provided by the employer, we know that it's going to be complicated for them to go to a Starbucks or to any other place, because the closest Starbucks will be like 1 hour away, right?
Right.
So the only thing that we can do is like try to get them in a secure hour so we can have the meetings and the intakes, and also try to get an address from them. So whenever all the paperwork is finalized, the open work permit would arrive to a different address, not the house that is being provided by the employer, because we know that the employers have access to those mails.
Yeah. Yeah. Very smart. Yeah, in most of those cases, the abuser is the one sponsoring the victim. Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely a power play that's happening there. An abuse of power. And this what we're talking about here, what our number one, we're not necessarily trying to identify every solution. We're just trying to understand at this point, we're trying to understand from a mental health perspective, is this going on? Because one of the other things that tends to happen is there's people don't want to talk about it. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of shame around it. There's a lot of fear of losing their job or of losing their status. There's a lot of that fear is around it. And so, but at the same time, our number one goal is to find out if they are at risk. So that's what the A stands for. It's just an initial assessment. Is there any immediate danger that we're dealing with? Listen non-judgmentally. Allow them to speak freely without interruptions. This is one of those things. This is actually a skill. Being able to listen, and what we call active listening. Have anybody ever done any training around active listening? Yeah. So active listening is it starts with not saying anything. You can't talk and listen at the same time. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but sometimes, and this is partially where the skill comes in, is sometimes somebody will be pouring out their situation. And has anybody ever had a situation where somebody is trying to tell you what's going on and none of it makes any sense? I don't just mean because of a language barrier, but because it's like they're jumping all over the place in the storyline. Like there isn't like a beginning, a middle, and an end. They're throwing out random pieces of information, and we're trying to figure out what is actually going on. And sometimes they're talking about something that just happened, and then all of a sudden it switches to something that happened 3 weeks ago, or maybe a year ago. And has anybody ever had that where that's partly how the conversation is going? Like the timeline is all over the place. And sometimes the information they're giving you doesn't seem to be connected at all. Is that something people have experienced? So part of the reason for this is because when somebody is in an emotionally stressful state, right? It's part of that fight or flight response. We don't always remember everything somebody says to us in detail. Some people can, but for the most part, what we remember is how a situation or a conversation made us feel. That's what sticks with us. And so when we've encountered some sort of emotional trauma or physical trauma or a difficult situation, when we experience another one and it makes us feel the same, our brain immediately connects the two. Which goes, oh, remember what happened? And that's part of how our fight or flight response learns to recognize and assess danger. And so what happens is our brain goes, oh yeah, you remember this happened like 3 weeks ago. We had something similar happen. Totally different context. The situations don't necessarily had to have anything to do with each other, but we bring it into our what we're talking about because we remember how that situation made us feel, and this situation is making us feel the same way. And so our brain connects the two. And that's a helpful thing to understand because it helps us to not be as frustrated when they're talking and talking and talking, and we're trying to piece together what it is that they're talking about. Another tool or another key element of this active listening is repeating back to them what you are hearing them say in your own words. So we call it reflection. We're reflecting back to them what they're saying. And it's a matter of basically we're just, oh, so what you're saying is, and we just repeat back to them what they said in our own words. And this does two things. One, it helps them to clarify what they're saying. Because sometimes when we're going on and on and on, and we're talking things out, we're not like planning it all out before we sit down and have the conversation. And so it's just sort of coming off the top of our head. And so we might say things or use the wrong word or use the wrong scenario because we're really excited and frustrated or upset. And so what tends to happen, so one of the things that it does, it allows them to clarify what they're saying and correct what they're saying. The other thing that it does is it gives them a glimpse into what we are hearing. So it gives them an idea of what the situation sounds like from our perspective. And this can be a double-edged sword. It can be helpful because it lets them gives them an idea of, oh, so this is, I'm kind of reflecting back and hearing something back, and I can kind of evaluate it from a different perspective now. So it helps them see it from a different perspective. But how we reflect that back can be a situation where either they are more willing to offer more information, or they may start to withdraw and become less willing to provide information. And it's all based on how we are responding to what they're saying. If we're responding with things like, oh, that's just not that bad, you should just pray about that a little bit more, or you'll get over it, or something along those lines, something dismissive, they're probably not going to want to continue a lot of that conversation. Use open body language and silence as needed. What does open body language look like? Like when we say open body language, what does that look like?
I'm not 100% sure, but I think more like a relaxed kind of language.
Okay, yeah. If I'm listening to somebody with my arms crossed, do I have open body language? No. Super comfortable. No. This is super comfortable, but it's not open body language. Here's why body language is so important. Again, we talked about this a little bit earlier. Body language is universal. So, and it's not something that our brain picks up cognitively. It's something that our brain picks up subconsciously. So it's not necessarily somebody's going, oh, they're crossing their arms, they must be closed off. It's something that our brain reads in the background, and it's subconscious. And it's kind of like when you're reading a situation and you're reading how the other person is accepting or not accepting what you're saying. We do this all the time, and we do it subconsciously, right? So things like, some body language things that show somebody that you're open and you're listening is, one, having your chin up. Not like this, right? But having your head, like not having your head down. If your head is down, that body language is closed. But if I have my head up, then my face is now open and towards the other person. Now, you were saying that most of your conversations with people are online. Am I understanding that correct? Or do we have physical conversations with people, like in person?
I deal with one-on-one in person all the time.
Okay. So it's varying depending on the person.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you have one-on-one conversations with people, if you're sitting, right, then the number one killer of those conversations, this is the number one distraction. And here's something I'm going to say is not very popular. Nobody ever likes it when I say it, but putting it face down on the table does not count as putting your phone away. Subconsciously, both us and the other person, this becomes the focal point of the conversation. They may not be looking at it the whole time, but everybody is aware that the phone is there, because this phone is a source to the outside world. If this rings, all of a sudden, this becomes the whole focal point of the conversation. So One of the most important things is putting the phone away, out of sight. So it's not even in the vicinity, if it's an in-person conversation. Some other ways that we show open body language is our shoulders. If our shoulders, remember we were talking about that confidence, we want our shoulders, ear to shoulder, we want some distance between them. And the other thing that helps with open body language, and this is true whether we are sitting or standing, is our shoulders are off on an angle. If my shoulders are off on an angle while we're talking, this is open body language. When I'm sitting with my shoulders straight on, when somebody is in a heightened state. Now, in this type of conversation, we can kind of process through it and be like, no, that's not what's going on. But when somebody is in that fight or flight state, shoulders towards you comes across as threatening. It comes across as confrontational. Whereas if we have our shoulders just slightly, it doesn't have to be huge, just slightly off to the side, now all of a sudden my body language is open. What about hands in pockets? This is a common one, especially when we're standing up. Hands in pockets? Is that okay? Don't put your hands in your pockets. There's something that happens to our shoulders when our hands go in our pockets. They just automatically kind of go up. Now, this is more of a safety thing and an NVCI thing, but having your hands up, if you're face to face with somebody and you're standing, sitting isn't as big a deal, but you still want your hands out in front of you. You don't want them under the table or right. You want your hands out and visible with your palms up. And that way it's just one of the best ways to let people know that you're not a threat and that you are showing them respect and consideration. Don't minimize or offer quick fixes. Sometimes we can think in our head, oh yeah, you just got to do this. Quick fixes are not going to necessarily help. What we're looking for at this point in time is we just want to hear where they're coming from. The G, so that's A, L, and then G stands for give reassurance and information. Reassure them that they're not alone. And here's another one, that they're not broken. We can feel like we're broken. And often in these types of situations, people feel like they are broken or that they are about to break. One of the things I have found to be extremely helpful in dealing with some of these stressful situations is the reaction you are having is normal. I can see that you're upset, acknowledging the fact that they are upset or that they're frustrated or that they're angry, and acknowledging that and then saying that is a completely normal reaction. It doesn't mean that we need to stay there, but your reaction is normal. There's nothing wrong with you because you're having that reaction. Have you ever had somebody say to you something along the lines of, I know I'm not supposed to feel this. Something we say all the time. I know that this is probably bad. And then they tell you what they're feeling. That just gives you an indication of how they are viewing themselves and the legitimacy that they are giving to how they are feeling. Or the sentence, why me? Yeah. Why me? And the reality is that makes somebody feel like they are, when people feel like they're broken, it is really hard to feel resilient. But when we understand that a lot of the time, the reaction that we're having, whether it's the right reaction, whether it's a healthy reaction, because sometimes it's not, is not the point. The point here is that is a normal reaction. There's nothing wrong with you for feeling that way about this situation. You're not the only one who has felt this way. You're not alone. There's actually a lot of people in your situation who feel exactly the same. And offering basic culturally sensitive information about support options. So we're going to talk about some of those cultural sensitivities in a minute. But sometimes just saying so and approaching those types of things, that there is help. This is actually, this is probably something that you've experienced. This is a tricky thing to approach. If we initially come along and just start saying, we have all these mental health supports, it's going to be wonderful for you. Has anybody ever found that that works really, really well? It might in some situations. In a lot of situations, as soon as we say, we have a whole bunch of mental health supports for you, that immediately puts up walls with the other person. Nobody likes to think that they have an issue with their mental health, especially when people are coming from other cultures that are not Western based. The whole mental health thing is a Western cultural thing. No problem, Hillary. Thanks for coming and being what you could. Yeah, this is being recorded, so you can catch up later. It's great having you.
I was gonna say, especially because I work a lot with Spanish speakers, they always take it in a bad way when you tell them about like mental health, because in our countries, mental health means weakness.
Yes.
So if you're a man and you start crying, it's like, oh, the little girl is crying. He's not tough enough. He can't deal with it or whatever. So for them, it's kind of to the point of getting kind of offensive, that they would say, are you saying that I'm crazy?
Yeah.
Do you think that I'm not capable? Or so you have to be like very careful in how you like suggest the fact of going to a mental health facility. Yeah. Also, I encounter with some of my clients that I went with them to mental health facilities that if they say at certain point that they have I have a hard time with that word today. Suicidal
suicidal thoughts.
Suicidal thoughts. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's great.
They right away is like, okay, we will put you in the psychiatric ward, or we're gonna prescribe you a bunch of medications that you don't know for what it is, and it just scares you like so much, right?
Yeah.
Instead of like kind of like, I find that's something that is lacking on the mental health, the fact of having more counseling. Because sometimes it's more the fact of listening to the person than just give them a bunch of medications that is just going to put them like zombies and is not really going to fix anything.
Yeah, 100%. And they've actually been doing a lot of studies on this. And one of the things that we're saying that we're seeing is, because they're different counselors or different psychologists that you go and see are going to have different opinions based on what they are seeing. And so they will all, if you go to 6 different psychologists, you're going to get 6 different diagnoses. Something, and that's why I was saying at the beginning, people are complex. So just saying, oh, well, you have these symptoms, so this is your problem. If you have a different person listen to them, they're going to hear something different based on their own experiences and their understanding of what's going on. So it's not always a very clear, it's this or it's this. And so it's very, very difficult. The mental health industry, and I call it an industry on purpose, but the mental health industry is they haven't figured everything out yet. They haven't figured out all of the ways to deal with some of these things. They're still working on solutions and how do we deal with it. What we do know is that people are a lot more resilient than we often give them credit for. And if we immediately, I agree with you 100%, if we immediately go to, oh, this happened, here's the medication we're going to give you, then we're giving them a bunch of Band-Aids that could make the situation a whole bunch worse rather than actually help them figure it out. And part of the reason for that is figuring that out and working that through is painful, it's uncomfortable, and it takes time.
And I also think that also it is the fact that because of culturally, men are supposed to provide for the families. I know in the Canadian society is differently, like women has the same rights, they work 50-50, whatever. But in these places like Mexico, Salvador, like etc., like the man is the main provider. The woman stays at home, takes care of the kids, old-fashioned way. Some actually now work, but mainly the whole burden goes on the man. So it's actually harder to try to crack into when you're trying to help these guys that comes as foreign workers, to try to help them out, because they are so much into like, no, it doesn't matter that I'm depressed. I still have to go work because I have to provide. I can't show weakness.
Yeah.
And they even say like, because I encountered those kind of comments, right? Well, it's just, I don't understand why over here they give you incapacity because you have mental health.
Yeah.
It's not such a big issue.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah,
I think that's another like point, right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Yeah. So finding ways to approach that, to actually provide people with some help, are just talking about in terms of safe people that I know that we can talk to. I know somebody we can talk to about this. I know somebody who's gone through something similar. We want to encourage, so the E, encourage appropriate professional help. So whatever professional help may be appropriate individual. Sometimes we can offer to make the call with them. We can be there to support them if they need to. And respect any language, culture, and faith preferences in whom they speak with. It's not like it has to be a counselor. It could be a faith leader. It could be a family, a friend. It could be somebody that they can trust. It's not about necessarily the person's credentials as much as it is about, is it somebody they can trust and actually have a conversation with? And then encouraging self-help support strategies. A good question to ask is, like, a lot of this stuff we can actually deal with on our own. Maybe with some friend support, but a lot of it is what helps you feel better when things are hard in other situations. Maybe has nothing to do with this situation, but you've been through hard times before, right? So what are some other things that you do that help you feel better when things get hard? And encourage them to draw on those things. Maybe it's their faith, maybe it's their spirituality, maybe it's a connection to family or cultural community. Maybe it's just having a rest. Sometimes just having a rest is all we need. A rest and a snack. Never underestimate the power of rest and a snack. Helps us with our blood sugar. Nature, movement, music, storytelling, going and water skiing or whatever. We want to avoid things like diagnosis, mental illness. We want to use regular everyday language, respect their cultural differences. Don't push for immediate solutions. Presence is more powerful than pressure, and consent matters. We refer, but we don't force. So for the sake of time, I feel like we've touched on a lot of the cultural aspects already as well. And so for the sake of time, what I wanted to do is to Maybe just take 15 minutes, as well as that. Do you think that's enough time to do for some breakout sessions? So we'll do about 15 minutes. So we're going to go into some breakout sessions. I'm going to come in and I'm just going to give each breakout session a different scenario just to work through. And what our goal here is, these may be scenarios that you've experienced in the past. It may be something you've never had to deal with. The idea here is, how do we take this scenario and apply these algae strategies? So all of these things, how do we apply them in those types of scenarios? So what are some ways? And there's no right or wrong answer here. This is us just looking at how do we take this into a real life scenario? And how do you see using this as a tool for some of these situations? Does that make sense to everybody? Is that clear? Okay. Welcome back, everybody. How did everybody find that? How was that? Probably we're always good to have more time when we're discussing and working through some of those things. But I am interested to hear what people's thoughts were on the scenarios and how we apply some of those algae principles to those scenarios. So I wonder if we could have somebody from each group just share one or two things that sort of stood out or that you found as helpful tools, or maybe something that wasn't so helpful with applying some of those algae principles to those scenarios. Wonder if we start. Why don't we start with someone from breakout room 1?
Okay, I could start. We didn't really, we talked about sort of outside the algae, but I think it pulls into when we were talking about culturally appropriate and culturally specific ideas. So it would sort of go into the assess and the active listening, where it was sort of understanding the situation of the migrant worker when it came to, when we're explaining the risks and the consequences of filing a complaint. It would be also really important to understand, what would happen, worst case scenario for them. Is there a place for them if they, if everything went wrong and they did have to go back home? So it'd be using the A and the L there to understand the specific risks for the person as well as the general risks.
Right. Yeah, because they might be different for individuals.
Yeah, some, depending on some migrant workers come with a plan never to return.
Yeah.
So that's obviously a huge risk because they don't have, there's not a place to land for them.
Right.
Thanks, Stacy. Sorry, I just answered. Ours was a worker being threatened by their supervisor, having their hours cut, and they sort of asked us. They asked the support that they reached out to not to share any information with anyone.
Right. Any other thoughts on that? That's great. Thank you, Bradley. Appreciate that.
Yeah, so we also discussed that we have to encourage the worker for the professional support because we don't know how big is the problem, and
right.
in sort of situation they may need legal support. So we can refer them to a legal clinic, and they also can get support from the community. Like their culture, sharing same culture, and also it's good to encourage for the self-help. right? Understand how the system work, if they will report, what the consequences, what the procedure will be, because they usually are very feeling very they are feeling that if they will report, they are scared that they will go to investigate and it will influence everything. Yeah, so it's good for them to understand how the process and how the system is working.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, addressing assumptions. Because I think a lot of times there are a lot of assumptions based on past experiences, maybe in other cultural contexts, right? So if somebody comes from another country where that is the case or that is the norm, when they come to Canada, they may not realize that things may not work exactly the same. And so I think that information is hugely helpful, especially when it's expressed in a very clear way, so in a way that they're going to understand. Anybody else? Was there anyone else from that group that wanted to jump in on that? All right, I think that's awesome. That's great. What about scenario 2, the silent withdrawal? That was medium 2. Do we still have anybody from that group? People are busy. They're getting in. They got other things they got to get done.
Yeah, I think a few of us are here, but I actually think we ended up speaking kind of generally about it.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, someone suggested talking to the person, like it's clear that they're the way that they're acting is different than they would usually act based on it sounds like there's a previous relationship with the person or previous interactions with the person. I mean, I brought up the fact that unfortunately, I think there are limited mental health supports when we're talking about referring people to professional help. We were recently supporting someone who was able to access a provincial mental health line, or it might even be a national one, but that person spoke English proficiently. And so there are, yeah, for sure. And not everyone is in that situation.
Right. Okay. In terms of the assessment piece on this, when we're talking about somebody who, they at one point they were greeting you warmly, and there's obviously been a change in their demeanor, ability to make eye contact. Just as a question, I'm going to throw this out to everybody. If that's the case, where you're dealing with a situation like this, where they were being warm and they were greeting you warmly and everything seemed fine, and then all of the sudden they shift and they're missing shifts, they're responding to check-ins with "I'm fine, everything's okay," but you know that something is off. What could that shift sort of signify for that individual? Like when you're thinking about that assessment piece.
It could be a loss of trust that they have, whether they feel like there was some confidentiality that was breached, or they don't feel safe, whether justified or not, speaking with you anymore.
Yeah, it might have something to do with you and their perception of how that relationship is going, and whether they may have lost some trust in you for maybe it wasn't a good reason, but maybe they understood something differently. I think somebody else popped something. Any changes should be carefully monitored and proper support should be provided. Yep, 100%, Nazir. One of the things that we see when somebody goes from being cheerful and greeting you warmly to all of a sudden being reserved and withdrawn, and they're kind of starting to avoid, it could be like what you were saying, Bradley, but it could also be that they are experiencing some sort of abuse from somewhere. often when people start experiencing physical or sexual abuse, this is one of the key reactions that we see.
So it's kind of this connection, right? And we also can say it might be some stages of depression.
It could be, but when you have somebody, so there's two things to that, Olga. One would be if you have a situation where somebody is dealing with something like bipolar, then that might be the case where they're up one day or up for a period of time, and then they kind of get really, really depressed, and there's those big mood swings. So that's something that you would see as a pattern over time. But if you're dealing with a situation where somebody is warm and they're happy and they're excited about their time here, and then all of the sudden they start to become withdrawn, and all of the sudden their appearance is more tired and beveled. All of the sudden they're not making contact as much, they're keeping to themselves. That is usually an indication of either some sort of physical or sexual abuse, or for some reason they've gotten involved in usually in some sort of addiction. So it's often one of those are classic signs of someone getting involved in addiction or somebody who's been involved in some sort of abuse. And though that's a classic sign of that, which is one of the reasons why that A of assessing is the person safe is super important. It's doing those checkups and the follow-ups to make sure that they actually are safe. Because if they are experiencing abuse, is it something that happened one time and they don't have any way to, they have no support, they're afraid, or is it something that is now ongoing? And is it something that they need some help getting themselves out of? Does that make sense?
Yes,
James,
thank you.
I have a question. When someone is experiencing abuse, can be not the opposite as well, like aggressive behavior?
They can,
more
yes.
than past.
Yeah, we tend to see that happening more in children. So children who are experiencing abuse, sometimes they will become withdrawn, but on the other side, they may become more aggressive, especially if it's abuse that's happening over a long period of time. And usually it's abuse from somebody that they trust. So they're learning a behavior and they're starting to exemplify that behavior. So it is possible that the person will become, even in adults, you will sometimes see they're starting to snap and they're starting to become shorter with people. They're distracted, but a huge part of that, when you couple that with being withdrawn, that's usually we're seeing that they're being withdrawn, because anytime somebody is really warm and happy and everything is wonderful and they're full of hope and excitement, and then all of a sudden there's a huge shift, something has happened that is causing them to feel shame and fear. And so when we see that withdrawing, that's what we're seeing, is we're seeing shame and fear. And those tend to be associated with abuse and addiction. Cool. That helpful? Okay. Scenario 3, spiritual distress. Do we have anybody from that group?
I can go.
Awesome. Thanks, Christian.
Yeah, so in this case, we are experiencing a worker or somebody in the community that is, they think that God is punishing them, so they stop eating, stop taking fluids and anything like that. The main issue for us is to understand what actually this means to him in his culture or her culture, right? So
Right.
we decided that the most important part of ALGEE would be listening and not giving any advice, because we don't understand what this means to him or her, right? So also we have to separate the religious part than the medical part.
Yeah.
Right? the medical part, if the person is actually having symptoms of malnutrition or anything like that, we have to take him, even if I cannot say even if it's against his will or her will, but recommend to go and see a doctor or a physician, maybe somebody from his own community that can advise him.
Bingo. Yeah. Anybody else want to jump in on that?
Well, it's mostly like kind of like the pyramid, like kind of treatment like AAA. Basically, how can you know how to help a drunk person if you have never been drunk? So the best person that can help a drunk people is somebody that actually had alcoholism before, because they know what it feels to have that trigger for one drop of alcohol, the symptoms, everything that falling up, separating from your family because you have a sorry, it just like it did like
No,
you have a problem there, like you have an addiction that obviously like makes that your family gets away from you, or you start losing friends, etc. So who can help you the most? Somebody that already passed through that, because they know how to help you. Regarding what you were saying about like somebody can be cheerful and then like become sad as well, I think diet is a key point as well, because a lot of the migrant workers, they are used to eat a lot of like iron or like B12, etc. When they move to Canada, they don't have the same food, and then they start lacking vitamins, per se, like a vitamin D, because we don't have enough sun, and that causes depression. And it could be just a fact of like a lack of vitamin D, and you're sending them to a mental health facility, right? So
right. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. There are lots of things that could be involved in that. That's why, and in both of these scenarios, the most important thing is like one of the questions that I would be asking when we're dealing with the one of spiritual distress, thinking that God is punishing them, is why? Like, what is the scenario that is causing somebody to think that God is punishing them? I'd love to know what that scenario is. Go ahead, Bradley.
Well, I've sort of encountered similar but kind of opposite, where you know, we have an abusive employer, but the worker doesn't want to go through with any of the complaints because the idea is that God will punish the employer, not them. It's not for their job to punish these people. So I don't know if anyone's had any experience sort of trying to encourage someone to file a formal complaint, you know, especially once a new work permit has been secured and everything like that, and they're just, you know, they say, oh, that's God will take care of that. And I would really like to get some complaints on file.
Right. Yeah, and in a situation like that, this is again one of those, this is anytime we're dealing with somebody's spiritual situations. No problem, Stacy, thanks so much. Anytime we're dealing with somebody's spiritual situation, it's often a good idea if we can find somebody to connect them to in their own faith community. That will often, like, then at least they're going through it with somebody who understands where they're coming from, right? Because it might be something we're like, that makes zero sense to me at all, right? And I agree with you, Bradley. Like, I'd want to get some complaints on the books too, because it's not just about them, it's about other people who might be coming behind them. And that would probably be one of the points that I would try and make is, you know, that may be true, but the way that the system here works, if we have complaints on file, it's going to help protect somebody else. So in terms of having those conversations with somebody, because we don't want to be disrespecting other people's religious beliefs or their faith or where they're coming from. And this is having somebody who they can contact from their faith community. That's where it gets really, really helpful, because now the pressure is off of you to try and now understand their religion and then try and formulate a response. The other thing that goes along with this is the fact that we don't want to push our solution, right? Especially when there's resistance on their end. Anytime we start pushing our solution, we are going to start losing trust. Because nobody likes to feel like somebody else is pushing against, especially when it's a religious thing. It's like, no, this is something very real to them. And so we don't want to be pushing against it, because it comes across, whether it's not, but it comes across to them as we're not respecting what their faith system is. And that can cause offense and bitterness, and they're just gonna be like, no, I just don't trust you then, if that's the case. So yeah. Does that resonate? Does that sound helpful? I think with all of these different scenarios, we could probably spend, a couple of hours on each one, looking at different approaches and different ways that we can work through them. And I'd love to do that sometime. Unfortunately, we're at the end of our time, and I wanted to say thank you, everybody, for your participation. Thank you for the work that you do. I mean, I feel even just from these conversations that we've had, a better understanding of some of the things that you're facing. And like we were saying before, it can feel very much like you're up against something that is way too big to overcome. And the fact that you still go into it day after day after day, with a wanting to help people, it says a lot about you and your character and your integrity just as a person. And so I just want to recognize that and say thank you for that. Keep doing what you're doing, and hopefully we're going to be continuing to talk with Areza here, and looking at ways that we can support you on that journey, looking at other conversations we can have, other trainings, and being able to look at some specific aspects of what we've talked about today, where we can dig into this a little bit deeper, because I think we've barely scratched the surface of what is possible and how we can approach and support people. And anything that we can do to be a part of that, we are honored to be a part of that. And so thank you very much for having us. I also, my email, I'm going to make sure everybody has my email. So if there are specific things that you want to have conversations about or reach out, please feel free to do that. But otherwise, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Nadia and Etol, for inviting me here and making this possible. And yeah, I'll hand it over to you from there.
Thank you so much, James, for sharing your knowledge and your practical tools with us today. I really appreciate the time you took to guide us through the training. Thank you, everyone, for participating and engaging today. We hope that today's session has provided tools, useful tools and strategies, and deepened your understanding of how we can all better support migrant workers' mental health and well-being. A follow-up email will be sent shortly with the recording for those who ask. Yes, we'll be sharing the recording as long as the shared resources, and a short feedback survey that we hope you can all take the time to fill. It's just a short survey, 5 minutes, nothing more than this. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks again, and we hope to see you at future sessions. Take care and have a great rest of the day.